OSHA requires that companies have appropriate training programs for the skills that employees are required to perform on the work that they do.
And obviously you have, these forklift incidents, but there's musculoskeletal injuries that happen. And what is that? Just walk us through that. We're talking improper handling or lifting techniques. Is there really a technique to lift a box? Are we talking about, some guy who's a little bit older who's getting hurt? Why is that such a big focus? Because I've seen plenty of technology and articles out there from obviously, back injuries, things like that. But, it seems like it's a pretty important topic of conversation. What are some of the things that companies do to prevent those, musculoskeletal injuries?
There's a multitude of kind of administrative controls that you can largely do. They're ideally, transitioning from human lifting to some type of electromechanical device lifting is kind of an elimination of the hazard, which is the ideal kind of place to be. Some cases you can't do that. Sometimes you just have to, it requires some type of human movement of whatever the product is in the warehouse from one location to another. And so you can have, heavy lifting, which could be just an overload situation. You can have awkward lifting, which may not be a real heavy load, but just based on your body position, it kind of strains, your muscles and can result in injury. And then you have the repetitive type lifting where, performing the same motions over the course of, a shift or multiple shifts or weeks or months can result in some type of chronic strain or sprain as well.
So it seems complex. So how do you manage that? As a company?
I think, the fundamental is, again, starting with the hazard assessment and then building out, your control actions around the hazards. Always, it makes best sense to get your employees involved, be able to sit down as a team, have a safety professional who has a trained eye. Maybe you have an industrial hygienist or an ergonomist who joins your team in order to help you with your assessment. And you make a list of all the risks. You build a risk matrix around, what types of injuries could occur and what's the impact and likelihood of occurrence. And then you put actions in place in order to try to, again, safety, mitigate risk, and either reduce the likelihood of occurrence or at a minimum, reduce the impact if it does occur. And you actually build out kind of a hazard plan that everybody's had input into, everybody has buy-in to, and then you go through a period where you remind people, through retraining and maybe daily contacts, or you add some additional signage out in the area, or warning lights, painted walkways, things like that are common practices to mitigate risk in warehouses.
And so you mentioned training. I think that's obviously an important one. But I think a lot of times, you have these trainings, and every company experiences it, not just in industrial, but you have this training, and the outcome of that training, or at least your goal, is to change some sort of habit and behavior. But what is it called? The 10,000 hour rule, right? It takes 10,000 hours to change a habit or create a new one. I could be completely off base here. So, but you have this training, and how long are these trainings? An hour or two, and then what, right? So it's okay, we get everyone's buy-in, but then everyone goes back to doing their job. How do you ensure that companies, or I guess your employees, are actually acting on? Is this something that's you just got to build guardrails because it's when you have 1,000 people in a warehouse? How do you absolutely ensure that everyone is acting on that training properly? Is it technology? Is it just systems and processes? Do you have a million, safety managers or specialists that are hanging around the warehouse? Because I feel like that could get pretty expensive. What are kind of the tools that companies use, or some of the practices that companies leverage today?
Yeah. So I'm going to say commonplace today is peer-to-peer, right? So a work crew that's out there performing the normal shift work in a warehouse, they can kind of remind each other of the training and kind of the procedures that they should follow. Warehouse operator can remind a fork truck operator that may be going too fast or encroaching upon a walkway or something like that. So peer-to-peer can work in a lot of locations and is fairly effective. Observations, so formal structured observations of shift supervisor of some sort performing an observation of a worker, and then kind of re-instructing the worker at the end, or even congratulating the worker on doing an exceptional job, can be very effective. Technology is emerging quickly. There's technology that's out there today that can real time assess the speed in which a fork truck's operating. You can put speed kind of governors on mobile equipment. You can actually do kind of based on data collected while a fork truck's in operation, critique, a fork truck operator's conformance to the safe job procedures a particular company might have. You can actually use kind of AI enhanced video to kind of observe actions that are being taken and then flag things that would be not following procedures properly and give you opportunities to re-instruct employees. So there's a wide range of kind of administrative controls and that are generally accepted. And then there's technology that is available today that can enhance that and take it to the next level.
So there's worker observations, there's these trainings. Does OSHA require those trainings and observations to be recorded somewhere? And if so, what's the real accountability on OSHA? I mean, you see fines if there's not, if companies aren't properly, recording these various training events and observations, or is it just kind of a generally accepted practice?
Yeah, I think, OSHA requires that companies have appropriate training programs for the skills that employees are required to perform on the work that they do. So there's a wide range of, obviously positions that are out there, and companies write job qualification training programs so that when an employee is newly introduced to a new job, there's a certain list of prerequisites that they have to complete that, quote, qualifies them to be able to perform that work. And oftentimes it's a blend between kind of procedure review, maybe there's video kind of supplements that enhance that. And then there's a high degree of mentoring or on-the-job training that takes place. And then there's an assessment to make sure that the employee performs, consistent with the training, usually at the end, and then they're certified. And then you have to maintain those certifications. So they require periodic refresher training, in a lot of types of positions. One that comes to mind is, a fork truck operator might be required to, say, have a medical physical on a periodic basis, maybe annually, and then complete a fork truck refresher training. So maintaining those certifications, maintaining records of those certifications, and making sure that the only employees that are being assigned to operate, a fork truck have those qualifications